Et maintenant, je donne la parole à Josh.
Thank you, Monique. Also, thank you, Natalia. We're going to have questions, all three, after. Is that okay? Okay, Winnipeg. All right, so it is an honor to be on the panel and see the history of how we're able to have the movement of EIP and how it's been able to grow, but also very much to hear from Natalia and see really one of the most important aspects of coming together in this annual course is to learn from one another and be inspired. So I could see why you'd want to ask a question, because there are a couple cool things I saw as well that I want to ask her about and what we can do. Looking at human rights education in the United States, especially with the stunning statistic that Monique just raised of 8 children or 8 people, adults, being able to identify the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you can see we all have a lot of work. So, you know, when we go back to even the beginning of our course, when we started with our friend Andre, who's telling us how the UPR lacks many things, we saw it as the most important opportunity for human rights education. It was able, in that first phase of preparation, to say, do you know what human rights are? Do you know what the UPR is? Do you know these things? And we realized no one knows those things. And most importantly, even the teachers. So the teachers who are teaching human rights education didn't know about the UPR, didn't know how it could be used as a tool, thought they had all achieved where they wanted to be. But we found that when we did human rights education, engage human rights educators about the UPR, and in the first cycle, we had only a couple of educators. It was myself and 1 or 2 others, and we didn't focus on that. But in the second cycle, I made it a priority that I was going to reach out to a group called Human Rights Educators USA and to meet with all of their leadership. And we knew each other, but as teachers, I think we all know we're all very busy. None of us have time. Everyone's doing their own thing. And that's what UPR does, is uniting people for rights. Is I made it a point that every month I'd send a friendly email to another teacher, another educator, and say, how are you doing on the UPR? What's going on? Could we reach out? Could we meet? And they'd be, we don't need to meet. I'm already doing everything with human rights education. And so it was actually forcing us to be able to have meetings, to be able to put it on the national agenda of how is human rights education done, and more importantly, compare and contrast throughout our country and our communities what's being done. It was really the most important instrument to make us take stock of how we're doing. And if you can do this with human rights educators, you can do it with other groups as well around the UPR. And so it did take a while. It really did, to get people to meet. I remember one meeting, the person said, we already do everything possible, and I don't know why we'd even contribute to this. And I was like, you're Los Angeles? I think you have a couple problems when it comes to human rights, but I can't wait to visit you and learn from your class. And in the end, of course, she was like, we have a lot of work to do. So we were able to prepare this shadow report. And I'm just going to go over a couple of the main points here. The focus of submission was looking at human rights education, obligations by the U.S. government in the formal sectors in the area of curriculum standards, teacher training, and the school environment. And really, when we did this, we were able to organize, and I was able to set up civil society consultations at all those places in Massachusetts, New York, and California between July and September 2014. Also, we had these online surveys, because many teachers said, I don't have time to come to a meeting. I just want to do it online, which concerns me about teachers. If teachers don't have time to meet and they think everything's online, then I'm worried also for teaching our children in that way. But these civil society consultations were actually great, because we actually talked with each other, and we'd find one high school teacher in New Jersey who was just a renegade. He pulled curriculum from Amnesty. He found something from OSCE once, and he would come in with newspapers, and he would say, human rights are in the headlines. What do you see? And get students involved in projects. Other people were really doing it under the guise of service learning, that students study a subject and then go into the community, do 10 hours of community service, and practice human rights that way. So it was an amazing process to be able to get teachers together and to talk to them about human rights education, but also more importantly, for us when we do human rights, it's not focusing just on what's wrong in your country. It's not just the naming and shaming, it's the framing and claiming the rights of what we want. So to get the human rights educators all together and be like, what would be the ideal for human rights education in your school? in your county, in your state, but more importantly, in the United States. Like, what can the U.S. do, and how should we coordinate that? And so that was quite important to see what we could do there at that point. The next part that we looked at was we only had 3 recommendations from the first cycle, but we were pointing out how the U.S. had done nothing with those recommendations. So it was also teaching teachers that it's actually something the U.S. agreed to, and that it's another leverage that they could use with their superintendent, with their governor in different ways. So it actually mobilized teachers to get more involved and to be able to push the curriculum in different states. Public policies, we know we didn't have that as well, especially when it comes to police. They need a little bit of that if you've seen some of the videos. And we focused on that. The main thing that came up for us that was most exciting was under section number 4. Section number 4 was really the taking stock. So when we did take stock, we realized how far we had to go. The federal government had no coordination, no leadership, no oversight in supporting states' implementation of human rights education into the curricular standards. There was nothing at all. So we were then be able to say, this is what the U.S. Department of Education should do, and that we should do some work with the National Council of Social Studies. So what's more important evenly is we didn't even know who to target and who to put pressure on until we did this preparation shadow report, stakeholder report for the UPR second cycle. So that worked out really well. The other problem that we realized on a state level, we actually got to see how many states. So the United States has 50 states. Only 39 states even mention human rights in their social studies standards. Only 22 had Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then there was nothing on all the others. So if you're the U.S. and you think you're really doing well on education, you could really point out here 39 only mentioned it. And worse, when we looked at how they taught it, it was all through, oh, human rights, that's the Holocaust. Oh, that was the Civil Rights Movement. That was Martin Luther King. Let's talk about that on January 20th. Not there's human rights today, there's human rights challenges, and what youth can do and be involved in making things better. So that was huge. So that was very important. And then the last one was human rights skills and attitude. There was no sense of, it was like teaching it, but then not in any way measured. So what we focused on as well is what would a human rights school look like? So then we started, at least after we turned in this document, all the teachers in human rights education started to use a tool Amnesty had called Taking the Human Rights Temperature in Your School. And of course, many of them found out it wasn't quite the Hawaii temperature they wished they had. It was much worse. So it was very good to see those things. The other thing we looked at, though, is we started looking at best practices and seeing what's going on. So we were able to then build from the historical all the way up to what's going on today, but more importantly, how they can be involved as agents of change and positive participants. Some of the best practices we found was also important because that's the what we want. So if you see what other schools are doing, just the same way when we see what she's doing with OSCE, you're like, oh, we should do that. Or how did you do that? And now all the human rights educators who would meet once a year for a professional meeting and present their latest research at one another, this UPR forced everyone to actually look at best practices and then to coordinate together new campaigns. So they looked at the different schools. You could see there in New York, we had a lot of people pushing to make sure that they looked at issues there. They talked about the issues in that way. In Minnesota, they had access to the state of human rights around the world as described in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, looking at applying fundamental freedoms and principles into their daily lives. Example there was looking at Rhode Island. They actually had a UN Convention on the Rights of the Child as an enduring significant document to demonstrate an understanding of sources of authority and use of power and how they can be changed. So we actually had in Hawaii, we adopted the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and then teachers would say, what would a classroom look like if the CRC was fully realized? And then the students actually got to make plans of how they would organize their day for one day in a school year. So one school started an hour later because students said they hate waking up that early. Students did everything from picking the menu. But it was great because when they did these things, the students had to work and have their own decision-making process. So students would be like, I just want pizza. And the others would be like, this is our only chance to be in charge. Let's have a balanced menu. And then, so they actually learned it's not actually easy making decisions, but then they were actually actively involved. And that's what human rights is to be active participant in the society and being able to determine how things are done around you. So we're looking then at one last example, I'll say. A lot of people are doing things, though, was the one thing that we realized, but there wasn't a common bank where everyone could put it. And even now, that's some of the things that are being organized due to the UPR process is we've been able to say, look, no state is perfect. Wow, Massachusetts is doing okay. We can use this. That language is good. And I have to admit, too, in the work that I do in Hawaii, it was great because I could actually cite things that I normally would never be able to cite because I don't know what's going on in the United States and the other 49 states. But by going through this, it made everyone a lot stronger and they were able to organize. So with the second cycle, what the results were is we had double the amount of recommendations regarding human rights education, but we also focused in our advocacy beyond the school so that there'd be popular education along the same lines of we have contest with art. We have the winners of the contest. They make a calendar that then gets distributed. The artwork goes into the airport. So when all the tourists come to Hawaii, they see all these images of what our youth think about for human rights and peace. And so we're able to do it in many ways. So the real result is you realize there's no end to what you can do with the imagination and when you work with youth to participate. In fact, because of doing this, when the Sustainable Development Goals were actually announced, the students of Hawaii had their videos premiered in New York on the same day because we had 17 students make videos of what that SDG was to them. So what was rule of law, what was climate change, and they were so excited to be like, my video is being shown at the UN. And all the other teachers were like, you got your students to learn about Sustainable Development Goals? How did you do that? Like, they don't want to learn. And so it's a good example of what can be done. What we're doing now since we're now in the implementation phase, the final phase, is we're actually now have a contact at the Department of Education. We have one contact at the Department of Education that the State Department gave us, but we also met someone new in international education. And the crazy thing is in the United States, there are 2 people for the entire country doing international education. And that poor person says anytime you want to work with her, she's like, I just am so strapped. I have no funds. I have no time. If you could help me, it would be great. And that's not the response we think when we get to the federal level. You think they have more resources than we do. So we're really becoming friends, and I'm trying to show her how I can help you, and you'll have greater results than you ever did, struggling by yourself in your own silo, never talking to anyone because you never can do that. So one of the things we're working on now is identifying and making sure she'll agree to be the focal point for human rights education in the country, and that we're also planning a conference for the first time ever, a National Human Rights Education Conference in Washington, D.C., with the Social Studies National Council, with the Department of Education, but more importantly, with the local NGOs in D.C. who have great examples of what they're doing, but then also with different people from around the country and bringing them in. So we're looking at doing that at the end of January, early February, and everyone has admitted that if it wasn't for the UPR, there'd just be no way that we'd all talk to each other and continue. It would just be more of a social thing. So we've used the UPR as a tool to, one, be able to really take stock about human rights education in our country, see how far we have to go, but 2, to actually get teachers who are usually going through a lot of burnout because they're with their students, they're exhausted, to see that this can actually be something that replenishes their soul, that gives them more energy, that rejuvenates them and inspires them to get back into why they originally started teaching. So it's been a positive all around. We've also identified universities that there's only one university, University of San Francisco, has a master's in human rights education. Columbia University offers it briefly under teaching in their teaching college, but it's not a human rights education degree. So we're looking all the way from the universities that teach to get more involved, because we were able to see that our law schools are doing great. Sante. What we've been doing with our law schools is our students in human rights legal clinics are actually writing the shadow reports, going out and reaching out with the participants. So it's been an amazing process so far. And then one last example is Birmingham, Alabama. Obviously a place you'd be very worried to do a lot of human rights education and for most people, but the mayor's great. And the mayor came with our U.S. delegation on CERD for racial discrimination. And when we met him, we co-opted him and brought him to our side. And we talked to him and we asked, could we do a UPR Birmingham? Not a UPR DC, not a UPR Geneva process, but what's the UPR mean to Birmingham, Alabama on the 60th anniversary of the Selma March? And he agreed to do it. So we're there with the mayor. That's the first time we as civil society are with mayors. His security's taking us to meetings in their government vehicles. It's a news conference in the morning of Birmingham on the 60th anniversary of You're Here for Human Rights in Birmingham. And so it was a great way to use local state officials, but also for them to say, we're committed to human rights. And one of our panels was education, and we brought a student, a teacher, one of the Board of Education members, and they all agreed that they'll put human rights education in, and they connected it with their new museum they have on human rights. And the Human Rights Museum is doing popular human rights education with videos. So it's really been a great opportunity for what we can do, and it's been very powerful. And sure, it's the United States, but I assure you, we have little resources in this area. It's the same scenario we all face almost anywhere. Ironically, I would say Ukraine almost seems to have more with OSCE. And I always joke around with our OSCE officials in Congress to get them to do new things, and I utilize it all the time. So this is one of the benefits of all of us coming together. I want to stop now because I know it's time for our break, and then when we come back, we'll do questions. But thank you very much for listening.
Merci Josh pour cette vision et ce que tu as présenté. C'est vrai que lors des deux EPU, des trois EPU, la société civile états-unienne, pas américaine, mais états-unienne, a été remarquable. Elle a été tellement remarquable qu'on n'avait plus de place, nous, pour s'installer. On n'avait pas la possibilité d'accréditer plus d'une personne, tellement il y avait du monde. Mais c'était une quarantaine d'ONG qui viennent pour écouter le PU et pour manifester. Bon, la première fois c'était Bush, donc c'était compréhensible. Bon, alors ce que je voulais vous dire avant qu'on passe à la pause, et après la pause, donc on passera aux questions et puis un peu à vos expériences, à vous d'éducation aux droits de l'homme. Moi, je voudrais dire un petit mot. En fait, toutes les initiatives, bon, c'est aussi bien celle de Josh que celle de Natalia ou que celle de l'école Instrument de paix, pour l'éducation aux droits de l'homme, viennent de la société civile. Ça, il faut le dire dès le départ. Parce que vous comprenez que c'est une question éminemment politique. La question de l'éducation, elle est politique. On forme des citoyens responsables ou on forme des moutons ou des esclaves. C'est une question qui a toujours existé. Okay ? Donc, les politiques ont peur de l'éducation aux droits de l'homme. Alors, pour plusieurs raisons. D'abord, dans nos pays à nous, démocratiques et riches, ils vous disent « Non, mais ça va coûter cher. Non, on n'a pas d'argent. » Parce qu'ils pensent que c'est une question d'argent. Or, que vous formiez dans les écoles pour les instituteurs, quand vous formez les enseignants, ça coûte quelque chose, mais que vous y mettiez les droits de l'homme, ça ne coûte pas plus cher. Donc, c'est fallacieux de dire que l'éducation aux droits de l'homme coûte cher. C'est pas vrai. Quand vous formez vos enseignants, vous pouvez les former dans les écoles normales aux droits de l'homme. Ça paraît élémentaire. Bon, d'autres pays, évidemment, n'en veulent pas, tout simplement parce qu'ils veulent pas former des révolutionnaires ou des personnes qui vont aller forcément manifester et militer. Donc, c'est pour ça que c'est la société civile qui doit le faire, et c'est pour ça que c'est une question très ingrate, très injuste, parce que quand on fait de l'éducation aux droits de l'homme, on ne voit pas de résultats tout de suite. Or, on est dans une société maintenant où, dès que vous faites quelque chose, il faut voir un résultat, il faut l'évaluer, il faut le calculer. Donc, on sème des graines quand on fait de l'éducation. C'est pour nos enfants, c'est pour le monde de demain. Donc, il y a plusieurs raisons dont on aura peut-être l'occasion de parler tout à l'heure. Mais c'est une question éminemment politique qui fait peur aux États. Et avec le PU, on a pu un peu revenir là-dessus avec cette déclaration, mais c'est à la société civile de dire non, on veut l'éducation aux droits de l'homme. Et ça ne coûte pas plus cher. Voilà.